So now we're going to address Susan's question about the contract and how does this deal look? Because this is something that's pretty foreign to most people. How does this thing happen? So Lauren's going to pass out a sheet that is something for you guys to be able to take home with you and take some notes on. It's a little more detailed than this, but not as detailed as what I'm going to be talking about. So the first thing here is finding the buyer, right? And we've talked a lot about who the buyers are and how to find them. But thinking about what kind of third-party intermediary you may need. So for strategic buyers, it might be an investment bank. You may be looking at private equity firms. Those are big things that the vast majority of businesses don't get into. But it is out there and it may be needed. Business brokers are much more common. They're dealing with your businesses up to, I would say $50 million is kind of, anything from $35,000 to $50 million, you can find a business broker to deal with it. So do you need a business broker to help you find buyers? And more likely than not, the answer is yes, unless you have a network of people that you're going to go to as your prospective buyers. So who should it be? How early should you engage them? Having those conversations and knowing who those people are and that you trust them and that you've seen the kind of work they do is really important because they are representing your business. Now they will help you put together a prospectus or a seller's package. So it's an offering package that basically highlights the value of the business for the particular buyers that they're going after. It's a nice little pretty package, has usually pictures and a summary, and it tells about the 42 years that this has been a presence in our community, and it gives the whole marketing pitch around the business, as well as some limited financials and limited other information. The people who are getting this often haven't signed an NDA of any sort, and so it is general. It's a way to get the information out there for potential buyers without disclosing too much about the deal. Sometimes these offering packages don't even have the company name in them. It's generic enough that you can start getting the feelers out about the kind of business, the kind of industry to prospective buyers. The next step is usually it's the intermediary who's having these conversations, and once there's a level of interest, that's when you get your confidentiality agreement or your non-disclosure agreement. And we hear a lot as lawyers, those things aren't even worth the paper they're written on. In general, they are, especially in situations like this. It really is the credibility of the relationship, and if someone is a serious buyer that's already been vetted, they're taking this seriously. But you do want the non-disclosure agreement to be appropriate for the transaction. So making sure that it deals with the types of things that are being disclosed, that it might include damages for if there is some sort of a disclosure. So if one of your goals in this transaction is to keep it secret from your employees until it gets closer to the end, and your employees find out about it somehow, it's going to be kind of obvious where this disclosure came from. So are there damages that need to be paid if someone does breach this? So thinking about the NDA more than just a standard 2-paragraph thing, but really what do we want to include in that to protect the business based on where we are and what we're trying to accomplish. So the next step after that, after we get some buyers who are interested, they've seen a little bit more depth of the business with the NDA. They haven't seen everything, not the full kimono, but some additional information to get them comfortable with what a deal might look like. Then you often see a letter of intent or a term sheet. And that is basic deal terms. It says, I, Joe Smith, am interested in acquiring your business, and here's how I think the purchase price would look, here's how it would be paid, here's my contingencies on how I'm going to get the money to do it, and I need you to have a non-compete for 5 years. All the basic terms on what's included, what's not included, what the deal might look like. It tends to be pretty superficial in that it deals with the basic deal terms, but not a lot of the legal backdrop, and it's non-binding. And this is the part that people kind of try to get their head around, is the fact that I'm committing to this without all of the information as a buyer. I'm putting this on the table, but I haven't seen everything yet. So how can I commit to it? And that's where the negotiation goes. The idea with the letter of intent is that it's a good faith agreement to move forward, to proceed in discussions, to learn more about the business with the intent of having enough interest to invest. So the non-binding part, usually there are pieces that still are binding, keeping things confidential. Where a dispute would be dealt with if there was ever a problem with that letter of intent. So there's a few things in there that are binding, but the intent to finish the deal isn't binding. So it opens up the conversation, it gets some numbers on the table, it gets people comfortable with the conversation. And then from there we move on to negotiating those terms. So if I'm the seller and I get an offer that shows, okay, $5 million is, as Dave mentioned, I wanted 6, and they're gonna pay it over 10 years, ain't gonna work for me. So I may go back to them and say, okay, you know, I can do 5 million, but I need 50% of it at closing. Can you do that? And that's where you start dealing with some of the issues. The other piece that comes up really often is the structure of the deal, whether it's an asset sale or a stock sale. Those are two very different things, and we don't have time to kind of get into all of the details on it. But the really important thing is that generally the sellers like stock sales and the buyers like asset sales. So there's a whole tax piece that goes into the negotiation there. And how do we balance the purchase price to work for tax purposes for both parties? It just is part of the negotiation. Once we agree on a letter of intent and get all the deal terms agreed upon, you know, go back and forth a few times, then we get to the purchase and sale agreement. And the purchase and sale agreement is the definitive contract. It is the document that once everybody signs it, the deal is done. And that includes all of the legal terms, whether it's a stock sale or an asset sale, how the payment is going to be made, any contingencies to closing, oftentimes transferring a lease or a personal guarantee on a note, or that inventory is at some certain level. There's various contingencies to closing that are the things that would hold up the deal. And you want to be really careful in drafting that to be sure that anything that is really important to you as part of that closing is built into that contingency list. If them keeping your key employee on board for 6 months is absolutely mission critical, and having that contract in place is mission critical, it may be something you want to add to it. So thinking about what are those things that you have to have as part of that deal or you're going to walk away. And that they're things that can't be contracted into, but they're dependencies on the deal actually happening. Whether you as the seller are going to stay on board for some period of time. And what does that look like? Some buyers, they're not interested in you being around. And some businesses don't need you to be around. But a lot of businesses need you to help transition. And that might be a 3-month training period. That might be a 3-year consulting gig. It just depends on the deal. So thinking about what role you're going to play, how are you going to get compensated? Is that included in the transaction price? Is it a consulting agreement following the transaction? And again, there are tax components to all of those decisions, and so we use those things as tools to manage the purchase price and manage the tax implications. Throughout this process, there'll be due diligence, and I'm going to pass this document around. This is actually a fairly short due diligence checklist. If you want it, a copy of it, let me know and I can email it to you, but I didn't want to print copies for everybody.
It's not copies for everybody, it's just a copy.
Yeah, sorry. I didn't think everybody wanted a copy, but if you want one, let me know and I can email it to you. But this gives you a sample of the kinds of things that a buyer is going to ask for. And when they ask for all of these documents, all of this information, you want to be prepared to give it to them, and you want it to be in a nice, pretty package. The easier the company is to buy, the easier the transaction is going to go. And so due diligence is usually happening in the background as we're drafting and negotiating the purchase and sale agreement. And they're asking for all these documents, you're giving it to them, they're coming back with questions, they're asking for more documents. And you can do some of this as well as due diligence on the buyer. It's a good idea to have that as part of your process. David mentioned earlier about getting financials from the buyer. You want to know that they can do the deal, and you want to know who they are. Maybe you do a background check, maybe you do a credit check. Because this, in many, many cases with small businesses, is not a one day, hand the keys over, be done with it. There's usually some time period that goes on where you guys are interacting over some period of time.
One more thing to ask of any buyer. Doesn't matter if you are being cashed out, a written plan. What are they going to do? And it better be tactical. And if they can't provide it to me, go away. You've got a lot that you can ask of a buyer.
And you want to make sure that the skeletons are all cleaned up before you get to this point. Because if the skeletons are there, every single one of them is going to decrease the value of your company in the negotiation.
What's a potential skeleton?
Tax liabilities that aren't disclosed, They're gonna ask, for example, about maybe employee claims that you've had over the years, or that you happen to know about a similar trademark on the other side of the country that could be a problem sometime in the future. So you wanna make sure that things are nice and neat. We did a transaction about 1.5 years ago that as the buyers came in, we were on the seller side, as the buyers came in and started asking questions, there were always, oh yeah, and that wasn't documented over there. Okay, well that's not on the financials, but you know it's part of the money that we lent to the business. So and so there was all this stuff that just kept arising in the due diligence, and the buyer got more and more and more and more scared every time they learned more of these things that hadn't been documented. And they happen to just show up on this, well, what is this thing? Oh, that was this, and that you have to pay us before closing on that. And it just made them very, very nervous, and it made the deal really go sideways. So you want to be really clean with your books, with your corporate records, with your contracts, and have everything packaged up in a way that is super easy for this company to be bought.
Another quick example. You may have a really clean company, and there are things that are simply out of your control. For example, you've got an employee who either was an alcoholic and had to go through treatment, or somebody who is employed by you and had sex discrimination charges brought against them. That's a skeleton. It's not something you generally talk with, and frankly, you want to talk with Michelle about how you handle those conversations, because there's some fairly delicate legal issues to deal with.
Yeah. And so real quick, the closing piece, before closing you want to make sure that all the contingencies are satisfied. And it's similar to a real estate or a property closing where everyone gets together, you make sure everything is good to go, checks get passed around to the various players, keys get transferred, and it's a closing. It doesn't end there though. When you buy a house, the buyers move in, sellers have already moved out, clean it up, be done. A lot of times the seller is still there. And so having the agreements in place that really clearly define those roles and responsibilities post-closing is an important part of this process. So we don't have a true exercise on this. We are almost out of time. But I'd like for you guys to think about the plan of the timeline for your own business. What are the things that you need to do, and how would this look for you as you plan for your exit from your business, so that you have this ready and in place as you grow your business and plan your transition. Because we only have a couple more minutes, I wanted just to wrap up with next month. We're doing a follow-on presentation on valuation. So understanding in more depth the different techniques for valuing your business, what are the levers that you have to work with. So that is something coming up. And then in May, we're doing a program on alternative financing options. Not all businesses are bankable right now, as Debbie can attest to. But there are a lot of tools out there. There's a lot of quasi-public organizations that have funding for businesses that are established and growing. And so Michelle Bordell is going to speak on that in May as well. And we have flyers for both of those programs as well. Dave and I will be around for a few minutes after the program to answer any questions, but wanted to just say thanks for joining us this morning, and I hope you got a lot out of it.